This video is sponsored by Storyblocks. Hey guys, it's Max. Unfortunately, I am right about to sell the Canon EOS R5 with this awesome 24-70 RF lens, and I figured before I let it go, why not make one final video about these two cameras and my use experience over the last 2 months. Now, I really like this Canon R5. I'll let you guys know that. I like it a lot more than I expected, and I really wish I can keep it. And throughout this video, we'll go over the different categories and where I think each camera does better and where I really have been surprised. Let's start out with the design. Now, both these look like their predecessors, small little updates, but overall, I really like the design of the R5. And man, I do love this little LCD screen on top. Now I know the Sony is really small, but couldn't they moved a couple of these buttons and gave us a small screen? I don't know. It's nice to be able to quickly look down when I'm setting up on a tripod and just instantly see all of my settings. It is awesome. Now, along with that, just the feel in the hand, it is larger, but it's so much more comfortable as far as the grip, where some of the dials are. I've really been pleasantly surprised with it. Now, Canon cameras have been better as far as ease of use for a while now. We had the flip around screens that were great, much easier menus, but honestly, I think Sony has now caught up. We do have a menu system that is touchscreen, and I feel like it's actually better laid out now. We have tons of customizations as far as the function menu, my menus, and certain things can be changed as you're actually recording. So you can go in and change your white balance as you're recording. And I really like how this new side panel is set up for all your inputs. For example, what I use most often is the microphone jack. And here you can just open up one little door. It barely gets in the way instead of a huge rubber section, and you can plug that in. And of course, with that, we do have a full-size HDMI. I have no idea why Canon did not put it into this camera that is heavily marketed towards video. We have 8K, we have 4K 120. So that has been kind of a frustration, where this, you can plug it into almost anything with that regular cable. And there's a lot more things about the Sony that make it a professional video tool. For example, you can dual record on the 2 card slots or the CF type A slots if you want. Some people say you could do that with the Canon. That's not really true. If you're shooting 8K RAW, then yes, you can record a proxy file, but that is it. As soon as you actually open up the SD slot here, it just kicks you out of the camera. So you can't hot swap cards or anything like that, which you actually can do on the Sony, which is really awesome. Now, along with that, there's a couple other things that really stand out. We have a lot of tools for video, not as much as Panasonic, but still more than the Canon. And we have this mount right here where you can attach different microphones, you can attach wireless microphones, you can attach an XLR adapter here so you can have phantom power, and it actually accepts a digital signal now. So that is a really cool capability that you can't get with Canon. Along with that, I have to say that the EVF is phenomenal on this A7s3. It makes manual focusing amazing. Now we're gonna talk about autofocus here in a bit, but wow, this thing is awesome. A huge step up from my A7 IIIs. Now with that said, the EOS R5's EVF is still one of the best, and it's not that far off from the A7s3. Now yes, I could tell a difference, but I have no complaints. Now, what I do have complaints about is the rear LCD on the Sony A7s III. When I pick up the EOS R5 and I look at this display on here, this looks more like a smartphone display. It's nice and bright, it's very sharp. I can instantly tell what's in focus without having to rack focus back and forth. Now, maybe that's on purpose. I have no idea. The only thing I can think of is battery life. I know the EVF drains a ton of battery. The LCD drains much less battery, and the battery life on the A7s III is amazing, at least in your standard 4K modes. If you go to 4K 120, yes, that drains it a lot more so, but I'm typically shooting 4K 24, and I can get 2.5 hours of shooting with this camera, whereas with the EOS R5, I like to shoot the 4K HQ mode, which we'll talk about that in a sec here. But just shooting the regular non-HQ or the bad quality mode, if I can call it that, I'm getting about an hour and 45 minutes, which is not bad. It's kind of typical, but it's still not fantastic like the A7S III. Now, along with that, with the A7S III, one thing I absolutely love about it, and one major reason why I'm gonna be sticking with A7S IIIs, between a couple different reasons, is that you don't get the shut off after a half hour. You can keep recording for 2 hours or 3 hours, which is what we've been doing. I have an A7S III right there. I have this one right here. I have another one. Yes, I have 3 of them. And it is great for some of the content that we've been pushing out on the Max Tech channel. Just hit record. You know that your battery life is solid. You know that your cards will automatically swap to the other one if you're using it in that mode. And you don't have to worry about that 30-minute limit, which with this Canon, I don't know why they're putting that limit in. Just so you guys know, there is no more tax limit. That all expired. There's no reason to put a 30-minute limit in here other than maybe protecting your cinema line. I think that's the only thing that makes sense. With Sony, even the a6400 that I used to use up there, there's no recording limit whatsoever. As long as you have a battery and a card, you're set. And I guess overheating as well. Now, before we talk about things like rolling shutter, autofocus, IBIS, overheating, and why I really like this camera, but why I also can't keep using it, I gotta give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, Storyblocks. Many of us find that the YouTube videos, social media videos, or even commercial videos we make can use just that extra something, but once we're done shooting, we often just have to settle for what we have, especially in 2020. Well, that's where Storyblocks comes in with over 1 million assets, including HD and 4K footage, music, images, and even After Effects templates and motion backgrounds. New media is regularly added and everything is royalty-free for one low subscription price. Go to storyblocks.com/max to learn more, and the next time you're in a bind or just want to make your video better, you'll have access to a huge stock library at a fraction of the cost. Take your video to the next level with Storyblocks. Let's get into IBIS and rolling shutter, and I have to say I am so surprised with Canon. First off, as far as rolling shutter, I was honestly expecting it to be terrible because we have a 45 megapixel sensor. I mean, this sensor is fantastic for photos. I have used it for photos and it is great, a lot better than the 12 megapixel here. But in video, it is great. Now the Sony's slightly better, but in the real world, there is very little difference. So good job, Canon. On top of that, even more so, the IBIS performance, oh my goodness, it is awesome, and it definitely beats out the Sony, even with the active stabilization. Now I know with the Sony, you can use the gyro that's built into here, and you can go into the Catalyst Browse software, but I hate that extra step. I want to be able to just edit and be able to grab what I have, maybe throw in a little bit extra stabilization if it's needed, and not have to do that. Just like I hate transcoding, and we're gonna talk about that as well. In Canon, this is their first big attempt at in-body image stabilization, and they did so well, and I feel like if they're gonna keep improving this tech, they are gonna have an awesome system. So good job, Canon, as well. Now let's talk about autofocus, and I have to say that you can't really go wrong with either one of these. Both of them do fantastic, but I do have to give the hand to Sony. They've made a lot of improvements. This has their latest tracking system where you have the option to touch and stay automatically or stay manually focused on that, or you can go into a different mode, touch and it'll track certain objects. You have eye detection with both eyes. But where it really kind of stands out to me, and when I really notice the biggest difference, is if you just leave it in the standard auto mode where it chooses everything for you. I know that sounds scary, but this thing does a really good job just knowing what I want to be in focus. Now with the Canon, I feel like I have to be a little bit more careful, and a lot of times it will back focus a little bit or front focus. It's not terrible. It's a lot better than most systems out there. I would say it's in second place, but both are very good. And while we're talking about trusting the systems, let's talk about the overheating. When the cameras came out, the issues started coming up, and I actually did a few shoots, and as long as they were shorter shoots, it actually did okay. But once we had the latest firmware update, that did help dramatically. Now, the biggest issue is if you're shooting and the camera overheats, how long it takes for it to be able to shoot again. It's just very weird how the system works, but we have that hack where you can change the date on there, you can pull out the battery. Personally, I haven't had to do it. I know a lot of people have done that and did all-day shoots, shooting 8K video or the 4K oversampled. But personally, a lot of what I've used this for was shorter shoots. In the cases of longer shoots, I would just go ahead and put it into the 4K mode, the non-HQ, and just settle with that, which we'll talk about. But overall, for most of my shoots with the latest firmware, I've been fine shooting 4K HQ, which is what I've done with it most of the time. Now, of course, with the A7s3, Sony really cared about overheating, which is not typical like them. Usually it is actually kind of backwards, but they say this has 5 times better heat dissipation. There's metal that wraps around all the inside and above to dissipate that heat, which is why it cools down so much faster. But honestly, I've never had one single heat issue. Now, in my review of this camera, I did say that I did get it to overheat shooting 4K 120 continuously, and I just left it running with autofocus, with the screen on, and with the IBIS turned on for a long time. But who's gonna shoot 4K 120 for 45 minutes long? I don't know. In the real world, it has been fantastic. With that said, I do have to say that I think the overheating issue has been overblown a little bit. It just makes me think, what if we didn't have that? Or for example, the new C70, what if that had this full frame sensor in there and it was able to record 8K instead of having that Super 35 sensor for 4K only? That would be my dream, and that would solve the two kind of biggest issues with this camera. And now let's get into video quality. And this is where I both love the Canon EOS R5 and why I want to keep it, but also where I don't love it. So the A7s3, it looks good in its 4K, but I have to be honest with you guys, I do miss some of the extra detail from the A7 III. That 6K to 4K oversample looks fantastic, and I can clearly see the difference in detail. The A7s3 doesn't look as good as the A7 III. Now, when you also put that head-to-head against the 4K HQ, where we're taking the 32 megapixel 8K video, and it's oversampling that into 4K video, man, it looks awesome. Now, with that said, 1080p quality doesn't look great, and then 4K 120 quality also doesn't look great, and your standard 4K HQ with that, what I had to use for like longer interviews, it does not look great. It looks like, I don't know, good 1080p. I'll just say that. It looks like good high quality 1080p, and it doesn't stand against the A7S3's 4K and even like the S5's 4K. That looks a lot better. And with the kind of work that I'm really focusing on right now, which if you guys didn't know, I'm really leaning into YouTube on the Max Tech channel. We're posting there once a day now, and sometimes more than once a day. I need something that is gonna be able to look good with this 4K. It looks good, not great like the 4K HQ, but I know that I can record for a long time without the recording limit. And then with that, if I'm switching over to 4K 60, or if I'm switching over to 4K 120, the quality stays the same. So with this, and then now the other part with what we're doing is we are editing and uploading quickly for that workflow. And there, the A7S3 also just really excels. A huge issue that a lot of people are having now when they're getting their R5s is the ability to edit. Now, I will say I love C-Log. Yes, the dynamic range isn't as good as the S-Log3 on here, but honestly, I did a dynamic range comparison and it wasn't that different. Now, with regular modes, yes, it's a bigger difference, but with C-Log, if you're grading it using the latest updated LUT, which I'll link to in the video description, maybe it's a stop difference. And honestly, the C-Log is so much easier to work with, and the colors are definitely a lot better. I like them better, and it's a lot easier to achieve the right result. But with that C-Log, you're getting those 10-bit files, 10-bit 422 H.265, which even the newest generation of NVIDIA video cards that just came out don't have acceleration support. So I have to transcode everything. And with this, I can edit 4K 120 without transcoding. And with the Canon, I'm editing 4K 24 or 30, and I have to transcode it. It is frustrating, it takes extra time, and I don't know why Canon did that. It is, I don't know. Why not choose what everybody else is doing? Why not choose 444, or why not choose 420, which is what everybody's using? They have to choose the one codec that no computer can edit smoothly. And now let's flip back to the more positive side. Let's talk about low light. Now, the Sony A7S3 is known to be the low light king. At least the A7S and A7S2. I feel like this isn't really sticking as much this time around. There's a lot of cameras that are great in low light. Even the A7 III is great in low light. But what really surprised me is how well the Canon EOS R5 does in low light. And surprisingly, in certain scenarios, when you're shooting 4K HQ, it beats out the A7S3. Look at these results right here. Look at the C-Log results. It is awesome. That's because when you're oversampling from 8K down to 4K, that noise gets compressed 4 times. And just like the Sony A7 III actually looks a little bit cleaner than the A7S III at certain ISOs, because it's oversampling from 6K to 4K, same thing happens with the EOS R5. And I think this is also a low light king or a low light beast. Now with the A7S III, it is awesome at certain ISOs. It is a dual native ISO sensor. So right now when we're using it as an overhead camera, we are shooting at 1600 ISO because we want to get into that second zone. The first zone, if I'm shooting at 800, 1000, it's not that clean. Our A7S III is actually cleaner, but as soon as I go to the 1600, it looks awesome. Same thing for their ultra high ISOs. I want to get to that 12,800 ISO because at 10,000 ISO, this thing smokes it. So you have to be careful what you're shooting, and the low light performance isn't as good. And when you have that noise, it's much bigger noise because it's a true 4K readout, whereas the EOS R5's noise is really, really fine. And I definitely actually prefer this as a low light shooting camera. So now let's get into my final opinions and my final kind of thoughts and why I'm selling this camera, but why I wish I can kind of keep it, and then why I'm keeping the A7S IIIs. Now, obviously I've been a Sony shooter for a long time. The Sony A7S III, it's now reliable, has 4K 60, not only 60 full frame, but 4K 120. We finally have the flip around screen. We have great battery life. This is a really nice overall tool. But I really like shooting with the Canon EOS R5 better. And I didn't expect that. As a person who really likes Sony, this is more fun to shoot with. I love the rear LCD screen. I love the overall usability. I love the top screen here. I love the IBIS. I love the look of the 4K HQ of the 8K. It's an awesome camera. If they didn't use that codec, if they used one that everybody else is using, where they gave us the option of selecting which one you want, which is what Sony does, and if we didn't have that 30-minute record limit, and we didn't have that overheating in 4K HQ, maybe the 8K, that would be okay. But the 4K HQ, oh my goodness, I would be keeping this camera. You could shoot that 4K HQ and then take your project and send it out to 8K, and nobody's gonna be able to tell the difference. It looks like 8K video, especially when we're gonna have less compression on YouTube. It looks awesome. And the C-Log is great, easy to grade, and the skin tones look awesome on it. The IBIS is great. The user experience is great. The rear LCD screen is really, really nice. The EVF is nice. Their new lenses are awesome. I wish I could just take this lens and put it on my Sony camera. It is super sharp. I just love the design. I love the ring here where you can assign. I like this camera way more than I expected to like it. Honestly, I thought I would get this camera, it would overheat like crazy. I wouldn't like it, and then I would love the Sony, but it's been hard for me to let it go. I've been using it less because I have all 3 of my Sony A7s IIIs now, but I'm using it less and less, and I need to sell it. So with that said, if you're a Canon shooter and you're not sure what to do, should you buy A7S III or a Canon EOS R5? Pick up the R5, see if it works for you in your scenario with what you film. You might be surprised, like a lot of people that I talk to, it works within the confines of what they do, and they are really enjoying it. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys are looking to buy an EOS R5 and one of these lenses, let me know in the comment section below. Give me your email, I will email you and see if we can send this nice camera to a new home.